It's been about 4 years now since Resident Evil 4 came along and basically rewrote all the rules of the third-person shooter genre. So now it's 4 years later and we've got Resident Evil 5 on our hands. You're probably asking yourself, is this game as truly groundbreaking as the last game was? The answer is no, because it's a direct sequel. It draws on a lot of the stuff that 4 built up, but it doesn't have to be as groundbreaking because it's still truly a great action experience that really wraps up kind of this 10-year storyline that Resident Evil has been building up to, and it looks absolutely phenomenal while it does it. So you're back in action as Chris Redfield. He's the kind of main STARS agent, the guy that you've been playing off and on since the very first Resident Evil. You're on your way to Africa. You're basically looking into investigating kind of this bioweapons terrorism deal that's going down. You immediately meet up with a new partner. Her name is Sheva Alomar. She's actually a local in Africa. Of course, being a Resident Evil game, mission immediately goes off the rails. All kinds of dark, crazy stuff happens. You go to some really spooky, atmospheric locations, and all kinds of sinister events unfold. Ultimately, you're actually going to discover a lot of the secrets that have been underlying all the characters and kind of events that have been happening in the previous Resident Evil games.
What do you know about Ouroboros?
So everybody remembers at this point that Resident Evil 4 basically just kind of came out of nowhere and set all these new standards for third-person action. The kind of offset character to the side of the screen, like the real zoomed in, over-the-shoulder aiming mode. All that stuff was pretty fresh and new as of 4. But other games have come out since then, Gears of War and so on, that have really added more mechanics to that kind of basic framework. Resident Evil 5 takes a few of those ideas and integrates them with kind of the core formula from 4, but it doesn't take all of them. There are still some limitations here that you're not going to see in kind of more modern shooters. You can strafe now, but you can only do it while you're walking, so if you're going to try to run at any kind of speed, you're basically running straight ahead. They have actually moved the aiming and the shooting up to the triggers on the controller, so it does feel a little more like a shooter in that respect. You can even take cover in a few places now, but those are only places where the designers have defined cover points, but really those are the only places you need cover. Overall though, it's really important to note that this basically feels like a slightly improved version of Resident Evil 4, just in terms of the basic movement and shooting controls. So if for some reason that game really turned you off, there's probably not going to be a whole lot here that's going to change your mind. All that said, I really feel like RE5 just doesn't need kind of Gears of War style real fast action controls, because the pace of the game and the enemies is a lot slower and more methodical than you'd see in something like Gears. In fact, I think this would actually lose some of that traditional kind of Resident Evil survival horror feel if it was just another third-person shooter clone. So of course, just like in 4, you can still upgrade all of the weapons that you pick up. Probably my biggest disappointment with the game is that the salesman from 4, the what are you buying guy, he is not here anymore. You actually access the store in just a menu between chapters, so that's kind of abstracted and a little dry, but you can get in there and buy a bunch of weapons, get all kinds of upgrades for capacity and firing rate and damage and all that stuff, so still lots of options for customizing your experience in the combat. And overall, I feel like between the slight modifications to the controls and sort of the classic Resident Evil action, this game strikes a good balance between survival horror and kind of the standards of other modern shooters. So probably the biggest change to just the mechanics of the game is actually the introduction of Sheva, your partner, because she's with you from the start of the game all the way to the end. There is never a time when you're just playing as Chris. Even if you're not playing co-op, which you can either do split screen or online, she's there with you, controlled by AI. She helps out actually in a lot of cases. AI partners in the history of gaming don't have the best reputation for being useful. They get in the way actually probably more often than they help. She gets in the way every once in a while. There were probably 2 or 3 times where she got herself killed and I failed, which were pretty annoying. But she actually, for the most part, does a pretty good job. She will use whatever weapons you give her. She'll actually kill quite a few enemies for you. And you can actually use her inventory as kind of like a mule character, basically just to hold a lot of the items that you don't have the space for. And while I'd recommend you play through the game the first time by yourself just to kind of absorb all the atmosphere and the storyline, the online co-op is a good excuse to go back and play again on a harder difficulty if you do enjoy the shooting action. Resident Evil 4 was a game with a lot of just sort of bonus side content, and even aside from the co-op, there's a lot of that in 5 too. The storyline probably is going to take you around 12, maybe 15 hours to finish, but even after you're done with it, there are plenty of unlocks and other modes and stuff to play. The Mercenaries mode is back, which is basically just a sort of a time attack, score attack mode where you just kill as many zombies, rack up kill combos as you can within a short amount of time. You can unlock a bunch of stuff by playing that, and it's pretty fun in itself. You can also go back kind of gear style and select each chapter individually once you've finished it. There's actually a point system based on your performance, your time, and your kills and such in each chapter, and you can cash those points in outside of the main game to get new costumes and artwork and little figurines that you can kind of pan around. There's just a lot of little kind of side bonus peripheral stuff that will keep kind of Resident Evil fans going for a while. Okay, so of course there's no accounting for taste, but I'm just going to say it now. I think Resident Evil 5 is easily one of the best looking games of this entire generation of hardware. It's got just really convincing, nicely rendered environmental effects in all of the different places you go to. Just totally wild, disgusting monster designs, pretty similar to the stuff you saw in 4, but they actually ratchet some of that stuff up, just like all kinds of torsos splitting open and nasty, nasty stuff. I feel like I have to give special credit just to the cutscenes, the real-time kind of cinematics in the game, the basic kind of motion captured movements of the characters, their facial expressions. You get little kind of muscle movements, little eyes darting around. It's just extremely convincing. Some of the best kind of motion work that I've seen in a game. Of course, the dialogue is not exactly Oscar-winning material, you know, this being Resident Evil, but it's still really great and entertaining to watch. And just overall, the presentation, the kind of theatrical nature, the really high visual quality, they've just done an outstanding job at making this game look and sound awesome.
Poor bastard.
So in the big run-up to the release of Resident Evil 5, you may have been asking, you know, is this going to be the next new big standard for third-person shooters? The answer is no, not really. Is it a great action game, though? Is it a great entry in the Resident Evil series? Yeah, absolutely. You know, if you're looking for just a really tense, kind of atmospheric blend of shooting and sort of old-school survival horror, or if you want to know how the Resident Evil series as we know it has kind of wrapped up, or ideally, if you're both, you really can't go wrong with Resident Evil 5.